Good evening, everyone. Apologies in advance if I mess up, come a little bit out of practice. Everyone, please take a moment to update your name in Zoom and your role in the community. Can you give the announcement for translation support, please? And I'll just give that a minute. Welcome to the Peirce LSC meeting. The members of the LSC are the elected representatives of our school. The LSC is responsible for setting the school's direction and policies and for monitoring its financial and educational programs. All participants are muted and we will invite you to unmute during public participation. We have one opportunity for public participation tonight that will be 10 minutes long. Every participant may comment for up to 2 minutes during public participation. The chat will also be enabled during public participation. While the chat is not an official part of the meeting, it is a necessary community building tool for Peirce folks to connect and see each other. We rely on attendees subscribing to the IB profile in their interactions, especially being inquirers, knowledgeable, principled, open-minded, caring, balanced, reflective. These are the norms for using the chat. We ask that you save your questions for public participation portion of the meeting, at which time we will ask you to type stack in the chat so that we can invite you to speak in the order indicated. This meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. For those not wishing to pre-register and watching via YouTube, you may email your comments to peircelsc@gmail.com. At the conclusion of this meeting, Mrs. Amy will receive the video recording of the meeting, which will be posted on the LSC Google Drive on the Peirce website. I'm now calling the meeting to order. LSC members, please announce your name for the roll call purposes.
Evan Trad, teacher rep.
Elisa Wardick, community rep.
Sandra Kafarkas, non-teaching rep.
Lori Zamey.
Sorry. Javier C. Wright, parent rep.
Lori Zamey, principal.
Jerry Baumgarten, teacher rep.
Bill Kennedy.
Claire Gervaisi, parent rep. Sorry, Bill. Thank you.
Bill Kennedy, parent rep.
Matthew Kwame, parent rep. And Javi, I know why you're laughing. I'm going to try and fix that.
Oh, I wasn't even laughing about that, but now I will. Okay.
My account got hacked.
Oh, you poor thing.
By myself.
Technology is hard. Is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the order of the agenda? All those opposed? Abstaining, not voting? Motion passes unanimously. The first item on the agenda is the Continuous Improvement Work Plan Report and Budget SY 2022-23.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This was a special meeting that we had to call in order for me to give a formal presentation on our school's budget and a proposed plan for school year 23. I did have an opportunity last Friday during my quarterly coffee with the principal to give a draft of the presentation and was able to record that and share that back with the community. So some of you may have already seen a draft. There have been a few revisions, not significant, but a few things to take note of for tonight's meeting. So every year the local school council is to approve or not approve or make recommendations for changes in regards to the following year's school budget And we also, because our CIWP has extended into a third year, I'm proposing revisions to some of the goals within our current CIWP, but not significant changes to the theories of action or the action steps. So to start with giving a general premise for how our school was funded this school year, the district uses per pupil funding allocations when determining local funds that go towards schools. So this table shows our poverty rate over time from school year 16 through next school year 23, along with the number of students in the column to the right. And the number of students is only based off of kindergarten through 8th grade enrollment. Pre-K enrollment and budget allocations are not included in these figures that we'll look at this evening. So special education and pre-K are not included in this budget at all. So we're just looking at kindergarten through 8th grade students when we're looking at the allocation of funds tonight. So the last 2 years, the district allowed us to maintain the allocation of 994 students based off of school year 20's 20th day enrollment. So they used 20th day enrollment to project the following year's enrollment. This school year coming up, we're anticipated to be at 934 students, kindergarten through 8th grade. Our enrollment as of last Friday was at 918 students. So we know that throughout this school year, there's changes up and down with kids coming in, kids leaving. And then over the summer, I have to decide whether or not we're going to take students in from the lottery to help fill some of the spaces of students who have left. So the 934 number is actually greater than the current enrollment, but we're expected to be at 934. I expect that we'll actually be higher than 934 and put in an appeal for 20 additional students to the district and was denied 20 but allocated 5. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. So again, 60 student decrease in projected enrollment amounts to about $300,000 in a budget shortfall. This slide shows us what our dollars over time have looked like in the various funding sources. So one of the biggest funding sources for us is through the student-based budgeting dollars, which are local funds. So we see about 100,000 decrease in student-based budgeting coming to the school for this coming school year as a result of those 60 fewer students. We also receive supplemental funds through the state of Illinois, which is we're looking at about a 60,000 decrease. Because we no longer qualify for Title I funding, the district has given us $40,000 each year for the last 3 years to help offset the loss of Title I funds. So we're receiving that $40,000 again this coming school year. And then the one source of funding that we do receive for pre-K is they provide a classroom allocation for us to be able to cover the teachers and teacher assistants, lunches, breaks, and preps. So this year they've increased the allocation per classroom because principals had said that the allocations in the prior years was not sufficient to be able to cover those funds. So overall, we're looking at a decrease when we look at this from just an overall budget allocation. It looks like we have a deficit of $162,000. But that deficit doesn't make up for the cost of the 3.5% staff salary increases, which principals have to account for when we're actually in the budgeting tool. So when I go into the budgeting tool, the first thing that I saw was a $300,000 negative because the tool shows what the teacher's projected teacher and staff salaries will be for the following school year. The other thing is I made note that after I had initially sent the draft out that we did receive 5 additional students, which increased our student-based budgeting dollars by $23,485. Some changes to take note of for this coming school year are that the district is giving schools different teaching allocations. So Peirce is receiving 2 additional board-funded teacher positions where those dollars do not get placed into our budget, nor do they get taken out of our budget. But I'm able to put 2 of my highest paid teachers into those positions to free up additional dollars at the local level. In order to utilize those positions, schools must have arts and intervention in place. We're very thankful that that's been a model that Peirce has always had, but not every school has included the arts or intervention in their school program. The other thing that we're receiving is an additional pre-K blended special education room, and that gives us 1 pre-K special education teacher. So this past school year, we had 3 pre-K classrooms at the main building and 4 pre-K classrooms at the branch. At the main building, 1 of the 3 pre-K classrooms is a 3-year-old half-day pre-K classroom that's considered a blended program, where some of the students in the classroom have IEPs and some of the students do not. So there's an AM section and a PM section. We also had 1 4-year-old blended classroom. But then the 3rd classroom was just a general education classroom. By giving us the additional special education blended classroom, that allows all 3-year-olds to stay at the school the following school year when they turn 4, versus those students having to change from one classroom as a 3-year-old to a different classroom as a 4-year-old. So this is a good thing in terms of looking at the individualized needs of students with IEPs in particular, and keeping a consistent early childhood experience for them being in the same place. We lost 1 general ed pre-K classroom due to enrollment numbers. There's a good chance that our enrollment numbers will be actually higher in terms of demand. And then I would need to appeal back to the district to request that classroom that was cut. But based off of current year enrollment, we were down about 20 students. So for next school year, the district has cut 1 general education classroom. Also, based on the number of students with IEPs and based on the profile of those students, the district has cut 1 special education classroom assistant. So that's something that I have to monitor throughout the summer. As of today, that position is not needed in order for us to support the students with IEPs. But if based on enrollment or based on changes to IEPs from now till the end of the year, that shifts, then I will appeal for that position to come back. And then as a result of trying to fill the $300,000 budget deficit, we are losing 1 teaching position. And so in the initial slides that I sent out, I was calling it 1.5, but when I was actually looking back at what that meant, it was actually 1 teaching position, because this year we have a half-time interventionist in 1 position. And then in another position, we have a half-time interventionist who's also half-time special ed. So essentially, the half-time interventionist that we have in place this year is resigning because they're relocating out of state. And so closing that position then allows us, instead of having 2 people that are doing intervention, it allows us to bring that into 1 full position. So we're really only losing a net of 1 full teaching position. And so that 1 teaching position, in addition to the 2 positions that we're receiving from the district, equates to about $300,000. That's my proposal, at least, is to cut 1 teaching position, and I'll explain why in a moment. A few other changes related to our budget are that the out of school time funds that we received last school year were automatically loaded to our school's budget. And the district just gave every school a flat amount. This year, schools need to apply in order to receive those out of school time funds. So the application window will open, I believe, in 2 weeks. And I will work on getting that application in so that we can continue to offer free programming for students after school. Last year, the district also gave us approximately $130,000 in stimulus funds. But this year, they're not giving us those stimulus funds. They're giving those funds to us in the form of 2 positions. And then technology will no longer, general technology such as iPads and Chromebooks, will no longer need to be purchased at the local level. Those will all become district-wide sourcing. So Ms. Andrade and I are actually meeting with somebody from the tech department on Monday to share what we are looking at we will need for the following school year. The reason that I'm proposing the cut of one teaching position is if we look at our current enrollment by grade level, this will show the number of students that we have this year and what the projected outlook would be for the following year. So Matthew, I took your feedback and adjusted this slide. We can now see what each grade level line looks like. So our first row at the top indicates we don't know, we don't have these students in our building right now, but next year's kindergarten, we anticipate having 4 classrooms at about 28 students per classroom, and that's been typical for us as a school every year. And then you'll see generally at every grade level, we would have 4 classrooms. The difference is that this year's 3rd grade group of students, we only have 88 students enrolled. And this year, those students are broken into 4 classrooms of about 22 students per class. Due to budgeting, that's not a decision that I can make right now to have 4 classrooms next year. And so my recommendation is to close 1 4th grade class, have 3 classrooms at 4th grade with an average class size of 29. If over the summer or even now through the end of the year, we see, increases that are significant to 4th grade, then my recommendation would be that we meet call a LSC meeting and look at maybe reallocating some of the current positions that my proposal currently has. But based on today, with today's numbers, my recommendation is to cut 1 4th grade position, have 3 classrooms, and then our average class size in all grade levels is within the CTU CPS agreement. This slide shows what the organizational structure looks like for this year. But the following slide, I took this year's structure and showed what this actually looks like in terms of where the changes are happening. So we would be losing 1 general education pre-K teacher, along with 1 pre-K teacher assistant because of the 1 classroom closing. But then we would gain 1 special education pre-K teacher. We would lose 1 special education classroom assistant, moving to 12 teacher assistants instead of 13. And then we would cut 1 4th grade classroom. And then everything else that we had this past school year would be the same. The difference with the intervention, I just want to make sure I'm clear about what that looks like at the school. This school year that we're currently in, we had 1 full-time interventionist. We had 1 person who was half-time intervention, half-time special education, and then we had a half-time interventionist. So there were 3 different staff members, but filling the role of 2 full-time interventionist positions. Next school year, we would have 2 full-time interventionists, and there wouldn't be any half-time positions built within there. So it would be 2 full-time staff members that would be able to support intervention full day instead of the split schedules. This slide shows us an overview of how funds are proposed to be allocated based on the different types of funding. So with our local funds, which are considered board funds, there's a little over $5 million in position costs, along with our miscellaneous employee line, which is a part-time staff to support lunch and recess. And that cost is around $100,000 on an annual basis. We also need some funds for extended day pay for ESPs or for staff members. Periodically, there's a need to have teachers stay after school to help with different projects. And then I'm requesting a small allocation in supply funds, but a larger allocation later on in our internal accounts for supplies. The district automatically pulls our print services, which goes towards copy. There's a centralized copying program that schools are in, so that's a little over $13,000. And then with our supplemental funds from the state, majority of those funds, I actually did not list here, but the majority of those funds actually go towards positions. And then the remaining $4,659 would go towards supplies. And then part of our Illinois Empowerment Funds is we will receive $18,000 next school year, and that would go to support teacher professional development and there's about $18,000 that would go towards substitutes to free up teachers to do like whatever it is that we need to do. Sometimes it's like assessing students from the Dibbles test. Sometimes it's collaborative planning through extended planning sessions. Sometimes it's a teacher attending a professional development session. I also just want to make note that 99% of our budget is allocated towards staff salaries. And that's generally what you'll see in most schools, that we believe in the power of people over materials. There's a transfers that I would like the council to consider approving to support our school next school year. And the reason is that we don't have a lot of funds allocated towards supplies or towards other things that we would need for students to use in the classroom and for teachers to use while teaching. So I identified different funding sources on the left that are currently in internal accounts, and I identified where I would like those funds moved to. So I'll just pause so that you could become familiar with this. I had also emailed this out to the council. And also to clarify that these would be transfers that we would make from internal accounts to be used during school year 23. So this would be for next year's educational program. And then this slide indicates funds that we currently have available in our budget. So this is a large sum of money that's been given back to the school. And the reason that these funds have been given back to the school are from cost differences from what was allocated last school year compared to what positions actually cost. So there's sometimes an under or an over allocation, and there's a monthly encumbrance adjustment that looks at, did a teacher put in for a lane increase because they received a master's degree, their projected salary then goes up. Did a teacher remove benefits for themselves and they're like joining a partner's benefits plan, then their cost of their position goes down. Maybe in allocating a position, I over allocated it for a new hire, but then the position decreased. So there's different reasons why those funds get placed on the line. So that's one scenario. The other is that we've had several staff members on leaves of absences this year. And the district looks at the difference in cost of the teacher's salary compared to the cost of the substitute when those positions are not filled. So we've had several teachers on leaves that we've been unable to fill with a full-time teacher. And so we have a cadre substitute in those positions. And so then those funds, the difference in those positions also comes back to the school. And then the third situation is the days that were missed earlier this school year in like the early January days from the work stoppage, those funds also got placed back into schools' budgets. So it's a large amount of money, but my recommendation is to transfer those funds for use this school year towards the purchase of flexible seating, the purchase of subscriptions and supplies, and the purchase of student workbooks and texts for students to have access to as they're looking at next school year, like teachers to be able to utilize those workbooks this year in previewing content for next school year. The other thing that I would like the council to consider approving is the YMCA leasing agreement. So this is a agreement that we have in place every year with the YMCA so that families can utilize the before and after school fee-based options. So by us approving this now, it allows us to partner with the YMCA so that they can message out earlier than later to have programming happening and in place before start of the school year. This school year, because of all the changes with COVID and the return to school, we faced challenges with getting the YMCA program running at the beginning of the year. And so we instituted a temporary fee-based program. And I think I had shared with the council at the time that I thought maybe this would be something that we could internally operate and potentially look at hiring an after-school coordinator. But what we've realized is that there's a lot of management that comes with this and a lot of staffing that we don't have the capacity to take on, and being able to have an outside agency step in to coordinate this just makes it one less thing for us to have to manage when there's many things that are going on in the school building. As a result of the leasing agreement, the YMCA does pay a leasing fee back to the school. And so then we're able to use those funds. It's sort of like fundraising to some extent. Those funds then can be used for other programming needs that we have internally. In terms of updates to our CIWP, I met with PPLC, and we agreed that we did not want to make changes to the theories of action or to the action steps, but the places that we do want to make changes to are the goals. And I've shared this like a couple times with the council, and I've highlighted in yellow the data points that we're recommending to change. So we believe that the work we've laid out is important as it relates to formative assessment, differentiation, and continuing our work with our culturally relevant curriculum. But how we measure the impact of our work has been tricky without a consistent assessment tool. So we know that we have on-track rates, and that has been consistent for us. But what has not been consistent is students being in school full-time versus being virtual. And so last year when we made these revisions, they were based off of virtual learning on-track rates. And we had recommended on-track rates to increase from 74% to 78%. As a result of significant decreases in student attendance because of COVID, we have seen a huge decrease in attendance, which has impacted overall on-track rate. So we're looking at, we know what a year of school has looked like with kids going in and out of quarantine and then back to learning. So we're recommending using what our baseline was this school year of 65% of students being on track, changing, like seeing an increase from 65% to 68% of students on track among Latinx students, and then changing on-track rate for African-American students from 65% to 68%. And then also in the differentiation theory of action, also looking at on-track again, and shifting the percent of students on track from what we saw beginning of the year as 61% of English language learners to 64%. And then among diverse learners from 61% to 64%. So shifting what the baseline data point was to what we project the end of the year data point. And then access test to maintain the 40th percentile is what we had seen pre-COVID. We don't have this year's assessment data. And then in our third theory of action, which is focused on culturally relevant curriculum, to again shift the on-track measurement tool from 61% BOY to 64% among English language learners, and then for African-American students from 65% to 68%, and Latinx students from 65% to 68%. And so that concludes my budget presentation.
Okay, we'll move on to local school council discussion. Anybody have any questions or comments on the presentation?
I have a question for Principal Amy. Thank you for taking us through that budget and your hard work. I know that you've done everything you could to, turn lemons to lemonade as it relates to the budget that was handed down by the district. I'm wondering if you think that the proposed budget provides sufficient funds to operate in accordance with the CIWP.
So sufficient is questionable, but what it does allow us to do is we outlined formative assessment and differentiation as two key areas. And we've identified the need to have interventionists on our staff. And we have one full-time bilingual lead teacher. So from that perspective, that's better than not having that. We at least have those resources to support students, and we're seeing huge payoff as a result of interventions taking place, especially in the primary grades. Some of the other aspects of our CIWP relate more to professional learning. And so how we utilize professional development days and how we utilize our grade level meeting time. So one of the things that the district did do is they added in 2 additional professional development days for teachers. And so that doesn't show up in our school's budget, but it'll show up in like the work that we're able to do with teachers when they're freed out of the classroom. So in that respect, we have additional professional development time, and we have interventionists and a bilingual lead teacher that will be able to, pull on to support specifically tier 3 needs.
Any other questions? In that case, I have a question. We discussed it yesterday at our check-in meeting, but can you go into detail about, it seems like there's going to be some movement based off of the 4th grade class that's being eliminated, and the I know that halftime intervention is leaving, but can you speak to what the process is like for how teachers are being shifted around and how they have input on what they teach?
Sure. So every year, principals have to survey their staff to find out their interest in what they would like to teach the following school year. So I send out a teaching preference sheet that I asked staff to have completed. I don't know if it was like end of March or beginning of April. And so every staff member has indicated their preference, and they're also able to inform me whether or not they're planning to return the following school year. So that's one part of it. The other part is that I have to look at our school organization worksheet and where different teachers will be placed, thinking about the different endorsements that are needed for certain positions. So like a middle school math teacher has to have a middle school math endorsement. We know that our primary grade teachers, we want them to have an ESL or bilingual endorsement. So I have to look at teachers' certificate in order to determine which teachers are qualified to teach in which positions, along with their teacher preferences, and then figure out who's moving, who maybe has expressed interest in shifting into a different grade level or a different position, or who do I think would be a good fit for that, and then engage with them in conversation. So those are sort of like next steps is I'm looking at designing our organization of who actually fills these positions. Those are like next steps for me, are who has credentials, who's expressed interest, and then starting to have that follow-up. But then every year, administrators also have to make a decision on renewing or not renewing non-tenured teachers. And so that's a decision that principals have to make, I believe by middle of early May or middle of May. There's a deadline that the district will send us. And so then that also is taken into consideration. From a budgeting angle, if every teacher is renewed, we are able to keep there's a position next school year for every staff member that's currently on staff with us. It's just some people may need to shift to a different spot. But then the renewal and non-renewal question also comes into play, along with staff members who have informed me of leaving. So I already have 3 teachers that are leaving, 1 from the halftime and then 2 other teachers, and then there may be more. So as long as all teachers are renewed, there's a position for everybody.
And speaking of teachers that are renewed, last year in the budget, there was a teacher position that was not renewed due to budgetary reasons. Can you clarify whether or not you anticipate teachers not being renewed because of the budget this year?
I haven't made that decision yet. So we're still engaging in the reach observation process. And so we're still working with teachers. So I don't know today which teachers are going to be renewed and which ones are not going to be renewed. There's also criteria that the district establishes that indicates whether you can or cannot renew a teacher. So I cannot choose to not renew a teacher who's actually been high performing. That's not possible. There's also sometimes issues with when we're faced with cuts, there's issues with which teachers qualify for which positions. And so there may be one position that you have to have a particular endorsement. And if a position is cut, a higher seniority teacher may what's called bump out a teacher with less seniority because that teacher does not qualify for any other position at the school. So last year, I actually don't recall not renewing teachers. I think that it was more an issue that like HR has to do an analysis to look at which teachers qualify for which positions.
So is it possible that after the HR analysis that we'll have this same situation where a teacher who's at the school now won't be renewed?
It's possible that teachers won't be renewed. That's always possible if we have non-tenured teachers that are not performing at a high level, but nobody would lose their jobs this coming school year as a result of budgetary impacts.
Okay, I think that's what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
Which happened last year, right?
Correct. Last year was as a result of budgetary impacts.
Meaning the bump out thing that you were describing?
Correct. Correct.
Miss Amy, can you share, are there any ongoing recruitment efforts to raise our attendance or our enrollment?
Yeah, Shannon Gimicello, who's actually on the call, has been leading our attendance work. And so Shannon, can you speak to that, the work that's happening with attendance? Well, actually, Evan, can I clarify? Are you speaking enrollment or attendance?
I'm sorry, I said attendance, I meant enrollment.
Okay, I'll speak to that then. So we will find out within the next couple of weeks, the lottery process, and begin looking at the number of families that enroll from the neighborhood versus the number of slots that we have available from the lottery. And so we take in, maybe an average of 30 students in kindergarten, and then grade levels that are lower in numbers, we'll be able to take in some students from the lottery there. For fourth grade next year, we're not going to start with taking in numbers because we're planning to start the year with 3 classrooms. So I don't want to take in students and then we're over what we've been budgeted. But then we also will be sending out information to hear from families whether or not they're planning to return next school year, so that we have an idea of how many students actually plan to leave. So that also helps inform the number of students that we need to take in from the lottery, along with messaging through our newsletters, website, and then the district messaging around like the enrollment process. So those things will be happening. PreK, the PreK team has actually been working with Ms. Munoz to decide on a timeline to like flyer the neighborhood to make sure that families are aware of the PreK branch. And so they have a strategic plan that they're working through just to raise, further raise awareness about the PreK branch.
Evan, can I ask if there's a concern behind the question?
I mean, at the closure of a classroom is always concerning to teachers. This happened a few years ago where third grade enrollment was low. The budget caused fourth grade to move to 3 classrooms. And at that time, that year, we had an influx of enrollment and our classes became 33, 34. Some of us had 32, which was very challenging. So if there is recruitment efforts happening to bring fourth grade students in, we would want to push to open a 4th classroom.
Yeah, and I think with that, one of the things that we stopped doing during COVID is we stopped taking kids from the lottery, which has now put us sort of in this position because we didn't want to overpack classrooms. And so we were very conservative with the lottery the last couple of years. And now we actually did not expect the third grade numbers to be as low as they were. And that's been interesting to see that that's been the one grade level that's been greatly impacted, but we don't have sort of to speak to the concern about fourth grade in particular. We are not trying to increase class size in fourth grade because I agree with you, having 33, 34 kids in a grade level in a classroom is not ideal. And again, if we are faced with where we see huge increases in fourth grade enrollment, then we need to revisit whether or not we have 2 intervention positions, or if we then open a classroom until we know what 20th day numbers will look like. Because there's a possibility that we will get additional funds back to our school's budget after 20th day.
If you do have to open a classroom, what is the timeline for that? Like, how long do you anticipate that? Because I know staffing this year has taken months and months and months. Are we looking at, if the 20th day is middle of October, that the classroom wouldn't be open until January?
Yeah, no, we would have to look at, my goal is to see, generally we can predict over the summer what those numbers are going to look like. So that's where, like, by looking at what transfers along with new enrollees looks like over the summer, my hope would be that we can predict whether or not we need to make that change prior to the start of the school year. And then once school starts, if we need to then reopen the intervention position and we know that we receive those funds, then to do that. So I want to be able to tell teachers what they're teaching before they leave school. That's something that people want to know. They don't want to show up the week before school starts and then find out that their grade level has been changed. So I want to be able to tell teachers before they leave what grade level they're teaching, but also with the caveat that that still may change. And I would inform them as soon as I know that.
I have a question about something you just said about the lottery program. You said that the choice was made to be more conservative about the number of students that were allowed in from the lottery. What was the logic behind that conservative choice, and how long has that been going on?
It's been the last 2 years because we saw overcrowded classrooms. So there was the 1 year where we ended up with like 32 or 33 students per class in kindergarten, because we had more families from the neighborhood enrolling in the school. And we didn't predict that. We had been enrolling based on, or taking off the lottery based on what we had done from prior years, but we had seen a huge influx of in-boundary students enrolling that we didn't have tabs on. And so we didn't want to see classrooms of 32 to 34 students in a class. And so we said we need to be a little bit more conservative with the lottery and not take in as many students to avoid that. And then when COVID hit, there was that level of being conservative, because we didn't also want to overcrowd classrooms with this uncertainty of how were we returning, in what model were we returning. And if we could be a little bit more conservative to do so, we didn't think that like numbers would decrease by 60. So it's kind of like, there's like decisions that you have to make. And sometimes those maybe weren't the best decisions, but we can't change like the way that those played out. It's sort of like we are making decisions in the moment just because we were dealing with crisis. So right now it also is going to be like, it's a tricky sort of situation because we don't know post-COVID how many families are remaining in the city versus how many are leaving. And so we may see a little bit of instability. So we had reached a point where there was a lot of stability within our school, and we could predict with a great deal of accuracy that we would have 4 classrooms per grade level every year, and that was not changing. And now we're in a state of like a little bit of instability. So I'm hoping that the enrollment for this year will predict what a stable ground will look like for next school year and then the years to come.
So is it safe to say that part of the reason for the fewer students is that there have been fewer in-boundary enrollments than we expected?
There's so many different reasons. We've had a lot of families leave the city of Chicago. So we saw families relocate to be closer to home, and families that, you know, chose to, you know, live with parents or like, you know, people that they had to be caregivers for because they didn't want to risk COVID impacting their families. We saw families leave to go into private schools because they wanted their children in person in learning, and they didn't want to have their children learning at home. We've seen families move from like condos or apartments into houses, which has pushed them into other neighborhoods in the city. And then we've seen families lose housing it's sort of like the opposite of that, to where housing was no longer affordable in the neighborhood and they've had to go to more affordable places. So it's really, the last 2 years have been a variety of reasons, suburban moves, out of state moves, just a variety of reasons.
Okay. Last question for me, I promise. The one thing that stood out in the SY23 transfers is the FOP Walkathon, which hasn't happened for a couple of years, and I just want to clarify that that has been in internal accounts for years, and that's why we're okay.
So there have been, a little over $100,000 generally every year in our school's internal accounts fund, and it's been a combination of student fees, field trips, building lease income, but then there's also been some smaller line allocations. And so my goal over time has been to decrease the smaller allocation lines and to transfer them into funding sources of things that we need, like supplies or interpretation. And so I've gone through and weeded through another layer of where we have funds that have just been sitting in our budget and have not been utilized, which is why there was about $900 left in FOP Walkathon from years ago that I would like to transfer.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion?
A couple items I wanted to ask really quickly. On the slide where you have the summary of the budgeting numbers from school year 16 to 23, at the bottom of it, you're talking about a deficit of 162,437. Is that between school year 22 and school year 23?
That's correct.
And the numbers that you're comparing are the ones at the very right?
Correct.
Okay. So I think it's a little bit less than that, right? Unless I'm doing something wrong.
You know what? You're right, Matthew. It's because of that additional $23,000 that we
23. Okay, got it. So 23 is what makes
Yes.
the difference.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that
Awesome.
out.
No problem. Thank you. The other question is on the formative assessment piece, or actually all three of those sections. When we're changing we say which leads to an increase on OnTrack rates, and we make those changes. I'm trying to understand, and I apologize if you already explained that. I'm trying to understand why the baseline number changes versus the target.
Yeah, generally we don't change the baseline number. The reason that we're changing it is because OnTrack measures during COVID and remote learning look very different than when we returned. And so the baseline was not an accurate baseline.
You changed the way
now that we're in person, we see what an accurate baseline is. And honestly, I feel like next year's baseline is even going to be different because there's not the volume of quarantine. So it's a tricky state, but it's at least in alignment with this year's baseline.
Okay. Now I understand that they're just in some cases significantly lower than what they were before. So I was worried about whether that was a true, again, it's a measurement that changed, but then it makes it much, much lower. So I'm having trouble, right? Why is it so much lower than it was before? But I understand the explanation. Great. Thank you. That's all I had.
Any other questions or discussion?
I guess maybe like throw a little grenade there to Evan and Jerry. Any general comments, or we haven't had a chance to talk about that? I know that some of the stuff is, purely salary based and all of that, but Are there some things that you think we should be looking into? Are we overlooking anything? Any general comments? Yes.
No, I echo what Evan said about closing a classroom is always the most concerning because I think the positions that work directly with the students are the most important in the school setting. Not that the other positions aren't as important, but I think that any position that is directly impacting the education or well-being of the children in the classroom is very important. You know, we did ask for feedback on this, and that seems to be the sentiment of closing a classroom is concerning to our colleagues. Evan, am I leaving anything out?
No, I think that's the biggest like area of concern. I do know that, you know, one thing that I think as a school and as a council we have seen is Ms. Amy is very good at being creative in her budgeting, and she's also very smart in her budgeting. So, you know, I while it's not the best thing to close a classroom, and I know that she, I'm sure, thought very long and hard and looked very thoughtfully at the budget before making that decision. You know, it's hard to hear, but I do trust that she's doing what's in the best interest of the students in the building, because I know that's the lens that she looks at everything that she does. I do have one question, Miss Amy. For the pre-K position that's also being closed, what is the likelihood that pre-K enrollment will increase? You know, I know a lot of parents may have kept their younger kids home because of the pandemic, but now that things are lightening up, there could be an enrollment. But I also know that they're opening these centers all over the city, so that could also pose an enrollment issue. What are your predictions?
Well, I appreciate you recognizing the creativity and thoughtfulness that goes into this, because it isn't easy, right? It's hard because it impacts where staff are going to be teaching next school year, and that's not fun for anybody, especially as we've been doing a lot of work on our IB units of study, and people have been very heavily invested in that. So I do recognize and appreciate you seeing that. But in terms of the pre-K allocations, I talked with Ms. Munoz, and we said we're really going to work hard to get families as soon as the application window is closed and we can get that initial round of applicants in, that we want to get them enrolled into Aspen right away. Sometimes we would wait till the summer. Like, we would have the enrollment packets, but we wouldn't put them into Aspen. But the district will then look at that enrollment in Aspen as an indicator of whether or not we will maybe need to have additional students accepted to our school, and whether or not they will reallocate a position. I would want to know that probably by the end of June, because then that does impact, do we need to hire or not? And so does it, like, do the teachers that are currently there get to stay where they're at, or does one need to move into the special education pre-K position or a different position in the school that they're endorsed for? So there is a little like hesitation with that, in the sense that I think that we'll have the numbers. I'd be surprised if we, I'd be surprised if we can't maintain the 6 full classrooms that were allocated. I think the question is whether or not we'll be able to have the 7th. And pre-COVID, they would not have given us the center if the numbers in our community did not indicate that. So there's definitely, pre-COVID, there was a demand. I don't know what the post-COVID numbers are, but if we see by end of June that we do need that other classroom open, the district did say that they would consider opening that classroom.
I had that reminded me, I had a question. You were talking about when we're moving teachers around or what have you. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but what percentage are we at teachers having their ESL endorsement? to be moved fluidly throughout, the grade levels.
The vast majority of our teachers have their ESL endorsements. There's a handful of people that are not or are in process, mainly in like 5th grade and lower. There's a couple of teachers 5th grade and lower that don't have it, but we've been able to support students even without them having it. And then middle school gets a little bit tricky because of the endorsement part. So that's where we need to make sure that the staff members that are in the 5th through 8th grade content area positions have appropriate endorsements.
And then also the other thing, Matthew, you asked like the teacher input. I also think that we have to recognize that we did, as a community, I feel like we were very concerned about overloading the classrooms during the pandemic. And that was I feel like that was very supportive of admin to take that into consideration. So it's unfortunate like that now we're where we are, but at that place in time, I think that that was the right thing for Peirce. So.
Thank you. I do have a question about the proposed organizational structure, specifically for, and it's not much of a question, it's more a combination of parent feedback and in the words of a famous person, most fervent wish, and it has to do with the restorative practices coach. Over the past couple of years, I mean, we're part of the safety committee, Aisha and I, and we've seen sort of like we've seen and we've heard all the positive comments and the positives that have come from having a coach that helps navigate or deal with these types of situations. If there's any room when it's all said and done to possibly allocate more resources there, or perhaps another, maybe if it's part-time or half-time or person to that program, it's like the joke, whenever a plane crashes, the black box, we can always find it. So why don't we make the whole plane out of a black box? So I'm trying to see if there's a way to, emulate that and further increase that impact. So
one of the
no
things,
questions, I'm just, again, it's just kind of like a comment and feedback.
But sort of with that though, one of the things that parents did express last year was a desire to have 2 counselors on staff. And so that's why that is still maintained, is that while we do have to cut, 1 classroom based on class size, we're still at 29 students per class. My proposal is not to cut the 2nd counselor because of the significant sort of emotional need of our students right now. Both counselors are actually very busy right now. And so in that respect, while it's not directly towards restorative practices, that is one way that we are trying to be preventative so that cases don't reach the RP coach. They're handled from the behavioral health team with school-based counseling or referrals to outside counseling or group, whatever that intervention may be.
Makes sense.
Any other discussion or questions?
I just had one comment. I had the same thought, I think, that Matthew did when looking at these, the adjustments to the CIWP. But as I was looking at them, I also just wanted to, was thinking about and wanted to point out that this, we hear all the time about learning loss and what's, because of COVID and because of, time spent out of school. And I think this really just, gives us a picture of that, like a small snapshot of, it is maybe disheartening to see that number go down, but it does kind of give us that picture of this is what the teachers are dealing with. This is what they're seeing in the classroom. So I appreciate the effort to go back and look at that and to, give an honest picture of what it is that we're looking at and what it is that, there's clearly a lot of work to be done there, but that, we know that the teachers are working hard at that and the staff is working hard at that. And so, thanks for showing us what it is that you are working with.
Any more discussion before public participation? Seeing none, we can begin public participation. Checking the chat, there's nobody stacked for public participation. If you would like to participate, please type stack in the chat. I'll give it a few minutes. And by few minutes, I meant like 30 seconds. Kathleen Hayes.
Hi, good evening. Principal Zamy, can you explain the difference between the funds, and I don't know the names of the categories of funds, but there are $18,000 that you got this year and will get again next year for substitutes. And then there was a much larger amount you referred to that I inferred. You said they were stimulus funds. Can you help me understand, are those all under the umbrella of what are known as ESSER funds, or the COVID funds, so to speak, that Biden appropriated to states and states appropriated to districts?
I believe so. So when I look at my budget, I see ESSER attached to multiple funding sources. Some of those come from the position allocation, some of them come through out of school time funds, and then some of them come from the federal government to the state, and then the state to the school because of like work that needs to happen with priority groups. So if we look at like IAR tests, diverse learner, and their growth on IAR has been low. I mean, we've seen that for multiple years. And so some of those funds come from that respect. So the ESSER funds in relation to the teaching positions, yes. In relation to the out of school time funds, yes. The district is also looking at other ways that they're going to be able to subsidize some of the work happening in the school. And I'm assuming that some of those funds will come in the form of technology that is centrally funded from the district and allocated to schools. And then there's also other initiatives that are in the pipeline, such as support for teacher leaders to engage in professional development and to be compensated for their time in attending professional development. There's also like the Skyline curriculum, which is the universal curriculum. Some schools are receiving funds for like social emotional learning. There was additional dollars through ESSER funds that were allocated for smaller schools that often struggle with the resources because they don't have the per pupil allocation, but in order for them to provide, to avoid mixed class size or to avoid, or to not be able to offer intervention in art. Like, I think the district has looked at like the ESSER funds in a variety of ways, but at Peirce, it's coming to us directly in the form of those two teacher positions, the substitute money that I indicated through the Illinois Empowerment Funds, and then these like out of school time, like these other grants that we can then also apply for.
Got it. Thank you. I'm just trying to connect the dots between this larger news that we received, via education media about, I think 60% of the district's COVID funds haven't been spent. And then, like how that plays out at Peirce. And that's the nature of my question. So thanks. That's very helpful context.
Okay, last call. Oh, Lindsay Moon has stacked.
Hi, thank you. I'm not sure if it has been decided as far as the teacher and teacher's assistant in the pre-K area that is not going to be returning next year. If it's going to be the pre-K 3 or the pre-K 4 class, or will that be decided once you see enrollment?
Is your question which classroom would be cut?
Yep.
That is not decided yet. I do have some teacher assistants that are shifting out into other positions, some that will be certified teachers, some that have indicated they're not sure if they're returning next school year. It would be a classroom at the branch, not a classroom at the main building, but which teacher would need to shift into a different position has not yet been decided.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else wanting to stack? Okay, seeing none, that will end public participation. The next item on the agenda is new business and the 3 votes that we have. The first is the discussion vote on the SY23 budget and CIWP action steps. Is there any discussion on this vote? Seeing none, Principal Amy, do you have a?
Sorry, can I ask, I apologize, Miss Amy, can I ask you one more question regarding the budget? The 29 in 4th grade, how do you see that if we don't increase enrollment in 4th grade? How do you see that moving up as they progress through school? So what would that look like in 5th grade, 6th grade, when they become more departmentalized?
Yeah, that's a good question. Ideally, it would be great if we can increase enrollment to then be able to try and target the following year, 5th grade. So if we can increase enrollment a little bit at some of the other grade levels to see an increase in allocation for the following year, and also like be intentional about recruiting for 5th grade. But if we are not able to do that, then that means that 5th grade would be 3 classrooms, 6th grade would be 3 classrooms, which does impact our schedule, and it then impacts like every year there's going to be a teacher that's going to have to move. So we may be faced with that. I don't know.
Any other discussion, questions? If not, is there a specific motion?
I will make a motion to approve the proposed school year 23 budget along with the proposed updates to the CIWP goals.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Do we need to call a roll for this or no?
I would, just to be safe.
Okay. Bill, what do you, I think generally secretary.
Yep. And you are voting, you sometimes abstain, but not in these cases, right?
Oh,
Lori?
not in the budget. Yeah, no.
Right.
I'm
Not
voting
after all that
yes.
hard work. Principal Amy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jerry Baumgarten,
Yes.
Evan Trad,
Yes.
Sandra Farkas,
Yes.
Javier Seawright,
Yes.
Matthew Kwame,
Yes.
Claire Gervasi,
Yes.
Aisha Noble,
Yes.
Bill Kennedy, yes. Byron Adams,
Yes.
Lisa Wartick,
Yes.
I'm correct that Trey is not here, right? Yeah, okay. That is a unanimous vote.
Okay, motion passes. Next is the discussion vote on the SY23 leasing agreement with the YMCA. Is there any discussion on this vote?
Just a quick question. Last year when we were at this juncture, we're trying to figure out other potential sources of funding, be it by, and I know that we had, the major concern was due to the pandemic, that we didn't really want to entertain anybody else coming in the building, nor could we even allow that. Is there anything, has that changed? Is this something that could be reconsidered, or?
The district actually sent an email this morning indicating that we can go back to leasing the space for adult usage. So since pandemic started through up until this point, we've only been able to lease it for student programming. And so now we can, like in the past, there might be an adult group that wants to reserve the gym to play basketball, or to hold a church service. There might be other reasons, or an athletic event at the school. And so those things we've had to put on pause, but now if organizations are interested in leasing the space, we can explore those.
Got it. Thank you.
Starting when?
Starting now.
Okay. I'll let the basketball parents know.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Peirce to enter into a leasing agreement with the YMCA for before and after school programming for school year 23.
Do we need a roll call vote for this one also?
I second.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Fran.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Then in that case, I'm going to say no. And all those in favor? All those opposed? Abstaining, not voting? Jerry, I couldn't tell if you were opposed or in favor.
I was delayed. I'm not opposed.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, in that case, motion passes unanimously. Final item up for vote is discussion vote on transfer of funds SY22. And just to clarify, this is a vote on those both the slides, correct?
This one is from slide 10, just the school year 22 transfers. I rolled the school year 23 vote into the internal account, the internal accounts one into the budget, but that's how I was looking at that. The internal accounts one is separate, but if we need to add the internal accounts vote to next meeting, we can. I was looking at it as part of the budget for school year 23.
Okay. All right, so let's.
If you feel more comfortable just putting that on next meeting's agenda, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to proceed with that, but yeah, we can proceed that way. Okay, so the discussion vote on transfer of funds for SY22. Is there a motion? Or sorry, discussion?
I just wanted to clarify. I do have a question around that. I just wondered maybe whether we table this till the next meeting. I leave it up to the rest of the council to discuss. But I just wondered, because these are funds coming from positions, are we permitted to transfer those funds to subscriptions and student texts and things like of that nature, or
Yes.
is the requirement that they just stay with the position? I mean, I know you know better than, I'm not as versed in these things, Ms. Samey, so I know that you've done the work behind the scenes to to analyze that, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear, because my thinking was that those funds had to stay within a position, like money that was associated with people had to stay with people, but maybe that was my misunderstanding.
And no, those funds can be reallocated because they were, if we had not under or over allocated positions when we initially voted on those positions, we would have had those funds to allocate in a different way. And so those are funds that the funds that I am requesting are funds that can be transferred.
For the clarification.
I had a question as well for subscriptions. Is there any more detail about that? Are those software subscriptions or publications? Can you just give me a little bit more information there?
Those are some of our online subscriptions. So such as we use like Raz Kids, we use ST Math, we use IXL. So those are a couple of the online programs that we utilize.
And those are all approved vendors through CPS, right?
Correct.
Okay. Forgive me. My first time doing it, so I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, great.
Does that include that Desmos or whatever that just started?
That does not include it, but actually, I'm sorry, Byron, I want to clarify because I just looked back at the slide. So in the school year 23 internal account transfers, the material, there's a $20,000 transfer to go towards digital subscriptions, which would be what I had just described. The ones coming from the school year 22 transfers are going to more of like the Scholastic News.
Physical.
Pardon me?
They're physical texts, correct. I guess, magazines.
Correct.
Or okay.
Correct.
Okay, any other, so just to clarify before I ask for more discussion, we're voting on the SY22 transfers and the SY23, which is that longer list of internal accounts transfers we will be tabling until the next LSC meeting, or am I
actually, we can do both of them in this context because of the way that you listed it here.
Okay, in the agenda, you mean?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I will make a motion to approve the budget transfers from internal accounts to budget lines based on slide 9 of my budget proposal. And then I guess we'll do that one and then we'll do the second transfer separately, or do you want them together? That was messy, sorry.
I am okay with either. Does anyone have, technically, do we need to do them separately?
I would do them separately because I would do them separate. So I'll start with the internal accounts and then we'll do the other one. So I'll make a motion to approve the school year 23 internal accounts transfers as noted on slide 9 of the budget proposal.
Okay. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstaining? Not voting? Motion passes unanimously. And can we have, any further discussion before asking for a motion? Seeing none, Principal Zamy?
I'll make a motion to approve the school year 22 transfers as noted on slide 10 of the budget presentation.
Is there a second?
Second, Aisha.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, abstaining, not voting? Okay, motion also passes unanimously.
I just want to thank the council for your support with this. It's always, it's nerve-wracking when you're dealing with budget cuts and wanting to make sure that I've given you the information that you need to make informed decisions. So I just appreciate your support.
Yeah, well, let's tell PCPS to get those funds out. I think there was a comment around how much money has already been spent from as part of that ESSER or whatever. I think it's ESSER 3 now. I read somewhere that's for CPS specifically, it's only 6% of what they have, and they have to spend it up until 2024. I guess my question is, what are we waiting for?
That's a good question. What I will say is that this allocation of 2 positions, we were told that that would be for 3 years. So that is good. So I don't know what that total funding allocation will become in terms of the percent, but that could be one direction. I don't know the other ways, but that's a good point, Matthew. If it's only been 6%, what are we waiting for?
And I just want to say thank you, Principal Amy, for being so responsive to our questions over email and in person. Matthew, you and I met yesterday to discuss have a regular LSC check-in, and we asked you lots of questions. We went over time, but I felt confident understanding what I was voting for and being able to communicate. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Amy.
Next item on the agenda is norms. Would anyone want to address norms from this meeting? Seeing none, next item is announcements. Any announcements? Seeing none, last item is the motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Evan. Is this a so moved or do we need a vote? All right, so moved.
We're all voted.
Have
All right.
a wonderful spring break.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, right. That's when my kids still awake.
Yeah.
Good night.
One came home tonight and he's like, I don't have to do anything tonight because I got no class tomorrow. I said, no, you do. And not only that, but I'm going to add some more to it. Now that you mentioned it.
Put them to work.
Matt,